Hey guys, welcome back to We're Talking Movies. This is Cade, joined by Andrew, and today we are going to be reviewing Batman Forever from 1995. Andrew, so this is often considered by a lot of people to be one of the worst Batman movies ever made, although there are a decent amount of people who consider it to be an underrated Batman movie. And I'm curious, after rewatching it again, where does it sit with you?
It's definitely towards the bottom of the live action Batman movies. It's still not the absolute worst because it would take actual effort to be worse than Batman and Robin. But yeah, no, this still isn't great, and we'll get into the reasons why.
Yeah, it's definitely been one of my least favorite Batman movies. Like you said, I don't think it's as low as Batman and Robin, but yeah, we'll get into our reasons. So, to start this off with our pros, my biggest pro for this movie has always been Jim Carrey as the Riddler. Now, is this my favorite version of the Riddler? No, not necessarily. That being said, I still think that Jim Carrey is pretty great in the role. I think he really brings a lot of energy and life to the movie with his performance. And every time I rewatch this movie, yeah, especially to prepare for this review, his performance is something that I can always look forward to. And I think his performance does a good job sort of paying homage to Frank Gorshin's interpretation of the character from the 1960s.
Yeah, I can definitely see where you're coming from on that one. Weirdly enough, for me, again, I love Jim Carrey and he's very entertaining in this, but we'll talk more about this when I get to the cons. This is kind of a terrible interpretation of the Riddler, in my opinion. Again, Jim Carrey is hilarious and he gives it all, and watching him chew the scenery is always amazingly entertaining. But I think it would have been better if he had been a different character than the Riddler. Like, I think maybe Mad Hatter would have been a better fit for this. Still the highlight of this movie, just not a great version of the character of the Riddler.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from on that. And I think another pro for me. So, one thing I find interesting about this movie is that it's a film that has a villain for both Batman and Bruce Wayne. On one hand, you have Two-Face, who's more of a villain on Batman's side, since he wants to kill Batman because he blames him for what happened to him before the events of the film. And meanwhile, when you have the Riddler, while he does eventually become a threat for Batman when he teams up with Two-Face, he is more of a villain for Bruce Wayne, after he develops this vendetta against him for rejecting his invention. With all that, while I do have plenty of issues with the plot of this movie, I've always liked the idea of a Batman narrative that includes a villain for Batman and a villain for Bruce Wayne.
I agree in that case. This movie, I think, does a decent job at that. And I think the idea that they chose two different villains instead of having one villain try to tackle both of those aspects, and credit where it is due. But my God, they did the actual villains themselves. Oh boy, we'll get to that in the cons in a little bit. Another one of the pros I need to bring up for this movie is this is just the definition of 90s movie soundtrack for me. Just, the big, ultra well known artists, doing original songs for it. It's such a 90s thing, but I love it to death anytime it happens. So for me, that's a big, big pro, especially for the fact that, unlike any other Batman movie, this one actually has a song that not only went to number one on the Hot 100 with Seal's Kiss from a Rose. It actually went on to win Song of the Year at the Grammys. So that's something that no other Batman movie can say. So credit where credit is due, Batman Forever.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if I had maybe one more pro with this movie, it would probably have to be some of the cinematography. Now, overall, I don't think all the cinematography in the movie is fantastic. However, there's that one shot where Two-Face is flipping his coin at the beginning of the movie, or the shot of Batman when he's swimming to the surface after the helicopter crashes, or when we see him emerging from the flames, or even some of the flashback sequences I think are shot pretty well, where we see Bruce attending his parents' funeral or when he's racing out into the storm. So, yeah, it might not be a huge pro that I have with the movie, but I do appreciate some of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and even though Joel Schumacher is not one of my favorite directors, I've somebody who's seen several of his films. I can always say they always do have very good cinematography. Lost Boys comes to mind. Phone Booth is another one. Again, his films always tend to be very well shot, regardless of the actual quality of the film.
Yeah, well, now that we've gone through our pros, now moving on to our cons with this movie. Although this isn't as prominent as it is in Batman and Robin, do you want to talk about the bat nipples?
Yeah, let's talk about the bad nipples.
Like I said, the bat nipples in this movie aren't as prominent as they were in Batman and Robin. They are still a thing in this one, and this was the movie that introduced us to the bat nipples, if you think about it. And I know that the suits are influenced by the statues of ancient Greece, but yeah, the nipples and that whole design has never worked for me. In fact, believe it or not, even Tim Burton wasn't happy with including nipples on the costume.
Well, I'm not terribly surprised he wasn't happy about that because honestly, he probably wasn't happy about anything. He basically got his franchise stolen away from him. But yeah, I do wonder why this movie doesn't get more crap for the bat nipples as opposed to Batman and Robin getting all the crap for it.
Probably because they're not in it enough.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe the fact that they don't have as insane a close ups as they are in Batman and Robin.
Yeah, and just regarding all the costumes in the movie, overall, I don't like Val Kilmer's bat suit or his sonar suit. Same thing goes for Robin's suit, which also has nipples on it, and Two-Face's costume and just his look has never worked for me. I don't like any of Riddler's costumes, to be honest. I don't like his jacket that he wears with all the light up question marks on it, or his white costume at the end of the third act.
Yeah, I completely agree. And from what I understand, the making of this movie was supposed to be more family friendly than the Burton movies, more cartoony in a way because they wanted to sell toys and appeal to kids more. And I can see what they're going for, but there is such a thing as getting too cartoony. And some of these villain costumes, honestly, some of all these costumes in general, just they look too cartoony. They almost look cheap in some ways too.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Another big con that I have with this movie, it's always been one of my biggest cons. I know some people actually do like his performance, but I've never really liked Val Kilmer as Batman or Bruce Wayne. And again, I know some people do, and that's totally fine. I'm just judging it based on my experience with this movie. And for me, I've just never really found his performance as Batman or Bruce Wayne to be all that memorable. Part of that might be on him, and I think part of that might also be on the writing, because as Batman, to me, he just doesn't feel all that mysterious or intelligent or intimidating. I also don't think all the lines that he has in the movie are that good, especially that one line where he's on the rooftop talking with Chase Meridian and he says, "It's the car, right? Chicks love the car." Or as Bruce Wayne, he just doesn't have any charisma, in my opinion. Honestly, throughout most of the runtime, he just seems kind of bored or half asleep.
That's a very good way of putting it. When I was rewatching it, I'm like, wow, everybody in this movie, and we'll talk about some other performances in a minute, but everybody in this movie either seems bored chewing the scenery or horny for each other. But Val Kilmer is the worst of the worst when it comes to just seeming bored. And while he's not one of my favorite actors, I've seen Val Kilmer give great performances. Top Gun, Tombstone both come to mind. But this is not one of them because he doesn't have the like suave playboy personality combined with the deep rooted sadness and reclusiveness of Bruce Wayne. He doesn't really have the confidence and violent Avenger esque characteristics of Batman. So if you can't pull off either or, it produces a very bad performance in general.
Yeah, and that adds into one of my other big cons of the movie, and that is just the script, especially how it handles the plot and a lot of the other characters. And regarding the character of Bruce Wayne slash Batman, I do like the idea of him dealing with repressed memories, but I don't think that it's explored in great detail. If we had more of that, I probably would have been more invested in the plot. In fact, believe it or not, it's become, I think, relatively known at this point that Joel Schumacher actually had an initial cut of this movie that I think was around 2 hours and 40 minutes. And apparently, in that initial cut, there was a lot more going on with Bruce's character, that was explored through repressed memories. It was going to focus on guilt. And we were actually going to find out that as a kid, when his parents died, he was the one who wanted to go to the theater. All of that was unfortunately cut out because of time. Do you think if that was kept in the movie, the plot would have been a lot more interesting than it was?
Definitely, just because it would have given something to this version of Bruce Wayne and Batman to actually make them seem interesting. Because currently, it's a very wooden performance. It's like staring at a wall. I don't know if it's on Val Kilmer or if it's on the writing, but not the best Batman, and yet still somehow not the worst. Moving away from that and kind of cutting up some of the acting discussion for a minute, I need to highlight not one, but two, in my opinion, incredibly underratedly dumb moments in this movie. Because the Schumacher Batmans have a very infamous legacy of very, very dumb moments. The aforementioned bat nipples come to mind. The bat credit card comes to mind. The incredibly underratedly dumb moment from Batman and Robin of Robin bursting through a wall on his motorcycle and it producing a perfect Robin symbol. But this movie gives us two incredibly underrated moments in its own right. Number one, let's talk about the fact that they spend the good chunk of this movie talking about the Enigma box. It's not a box, it's a cone. That is it should not get me anywhere near as angry as it does, but it does. Okay, moving on. Let's also talk about the fact that the scene that got Alfred really impressed with Dick Grayson in this movie was Dick Grayson doing karate laundry. How does that not get brought up more as a stupid moment in the Schumacher Batmans? Okay, now that I've made myself thoroughly upset, here, let's move on to another one of our shared cons, and that's Tommy Lee Jones's Two Face.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, Tommy Lee Jones is a hell of an actor, but I really just can't stand him as Two-Face in this film. I think this is actually my least favorite version of Two-Face that we've ever seen. Part of the reason why is because he just doesn't really feel like Two-Face. He honestly comes off more as a Joker ripoff just when it comes to his characterization.
That's a really good way of putting it, actually. Two Face as a character always or is tends to be one of Batman's more serious villains. You know, the very dark and dour kind of character, but also one who is very intelligent and very good at planning. He's got a very well developed gang around him, and he's got the quirk of the coin and the thing and the dual personality. Well, they took away literally about everything from that character in this interpretation, except for the coin and the dual personalities. And then they just sort of ramped those up to 11 to the point where they're almost a parody of Two Face.
Yeah, that is pretty much how it is. And some of my other cons with this movie is just how some of the other characters are handled, specifically Chris O'Donnell as Robin. I actually think that Chris O'Donnell's kind of decent in this movie. I don't think that he's on the same level as he was in Batman and Robin, but one of my biggest issues with his casting has always been his age. To me, he's very clearly in his 20s, and when Dick Grayson is still supposed to be a child when he's adopted by Bruce Wayne, and I don't know if he's supposed to be a teenager in this movie or if he is just in fact a grown man. That's just always been an issue for me because, in my opinion, it really took away from the father-son dynamic that I usually enjoy between Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on that one. And I'll also agree that he's not as bad in this one as he is in Batman and Robin. And I'm also willing to cut him some slack because he is in character or in this movie, still very much dealing with the traumatic loss of his family. So I'm willing to give him that on top of it. But yes, still the fact that, oh, this is supposed to be a teenager or a kid, but it's played by an actor who's very clearly in his mid 20s. Yeah, that kind of just makes everything seem a little off.
Yeah, and another character that I want to bring up as a con is Chase Meridian, played by Nicole Kidman. Now, Chase Meridian is probably one of my least favorite love interests in Batman movies. And I do like the idea of her helping Bruce with his repressed memories, but again, it's not really explored enough for me to get invested in their relationship. I also don't think that Nicole Kidman and Val Kilmer have good chemistry in this movie. And again, Nicole Kidman's a fantastic actress, but the issue is that Chase doesn't really have a whole lot of personality or character. I mean, think about it. Her whole motivation in the movie or arc or driving force is that she wants to sleep with Batman. That's pretty much all that we get when it comes to character.
Like I said earlier, every character in this movie is either bored, chewing the scenery, or horny. And in this case, Chase Meridian is very much the last option, whereas the other person in this love dynamic is bored.
Yeah, I totally agree. And regarding another character in this movie, that's probably Commissioner Gordon, played by Pat Hingle. This and Batman and Robin's version of Gordon has always been one of my least favorite interpretations of the character. Not only do these movies portray him as this very incompetent and buffoonish police character, but I honestly think that you could just cut him out of this movie entirely and it really wouldn't change anything. That's how little significance he has in the film.
Genuinely, I didn't even realize that was Commissioner Gordon at first in this one. It wasn't until they called him by name. I'm like, that's who that's supposed to be? Yeah, let's take away, all the likable qualities and, deep characterization of this, very important Batman character and make him like a almost borderline stereotypical, like donut munching, incompetent, big mustached cop from a cartoon.
That's a perfect way to put it, man. Yeah. All right, well, to wrap this up, why don't we decide what we're going to give this movie on a scale of 1 to 10? So, for me personally, I do like certain things about the movie, but overall, the execution does not work for me. I've always had my issues with the plot and how it handles the characters and the performances. So, I think for me, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm honestly probably going to give this movie a 5 out of 10. Again, not my least favorite Batman movie, but definitely one of the weaker ones, so I'm going to have to give it a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, because honestly, I'm probably gonna give the exact same score just because again, there's parts I like, but overall, this is just kind of a drag of a movie to get through. Because when Jim Carrey's not on screen, God, it goes slow.
Yeah. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you later.